Starstruck.
Well, welcome back to a new season of Joyride. And in this one, we're going to be doing things a bit more differently. Predominantly, I am going to have a guest and co host with me the entire time, which is none other than Adam Mendenhall.
Hello.
What's going on, Adam?
Oh, just here for another good episode and hopefully some insightful commentary.
Now, a background to the podcast and the show itself is we already had one season out, which if anyone has listened to that, thank you very much. But that was originally for a college radio project that I made, and my professors enjoyed it, and they said you should probably keep carrying on with this. And I went, okay, I might actually do that. But for the next one, the next season, I wanted to do it a little bit differently. I really wanted to beef it up, improve it. So that's why we're going to have Adam with us throughout it. There could be some solo ones as well, too. But we're also going to have more sound effects and all that kind of stuff. So definitely things I'm looking forward to. The biggest thing, and B and Adam have talked about this, is we're going to expand the show because the first season was just about cars throughout history. Now we're going to talk about all things transportation in general. So we're going to have cars, we're going to have boats, ships, airplanes. Basically, if it gets you from point A to point B, it's something we can talk about.
That's right. Yeah, it'll be a nice expansion off of the typical automotive genre, which we can all get lost in 100%. So it'll be nice to do something a little outside the lines, you might say.
And what I also like about a lot of these stories is we're going all around the world with this too. We're not just confined to particular things, and so we get to kind of go on an adventure with every one of these as well. So now, Adam does know the general idea of what we're going to talk about, but he has not read the script that I'm reading from, so he is going in for just as much as a ride as the rest of you are. So you should all enjoy that aspect of it. So for episode 1 of this new season, that is The Car of Tomorrow, the Tucker. So I thought, let's stick with, let's kind of roll into this easily. We'll stick with a car for the first episode here. So I have everything right here to read from. So I'm about to share with you a tale from an era that was full of hope, prosperity, and big bad voodoo bands. The Car of Tomorrow became a reality in 1947. Post-war America was looking to create the future, and so was a man from the small town of Ypsilanti, Michigan. Now, I'm sure everyone in that town is going to scream at me because I mispronounced it. So I did my best. And actually, I'm going to put that disclaimer out there. Especially when we get into some German episodes, I'm going to absolutely butcher all that as well. So please enjoy laughing at it at the very best. Now, how was that for an intro, Adam? Does that get you in the mood?
Yep, that's a good starter.
Okay. All right. Preston Thomas Tucker was born in Port Huron, Michigan on September 21st, 1903. He was known to be a curious child and quickly fell in love with these newfangled things called automobiles. He even worked as an office boy for GM's Cadillac division since he was so fascinated by cars at an early age. I mean, it seems like everyone did that in that era. You were an office boy, I mean, like, was there just something in the paper those office boys are us, or I mean, what? I mean,
Something, as far as getting your foot in the door, it seemed like it was fairly consistent. And I think a lot of businesses back then really tried to institute that from the bottom up. You'd start in the mailroom, right, and then someday you get that executive office if you were lucky enough, and put your nose to the grindstone.
boy, that'd be bad if you're working with that guy. It's like, how long you been here? About a month. I've been here since I've been 9.
Yeah, I'm sure there was some of that.
All right. Though, unlike a lot of people like this, Preston did go to college or high school, and he did graduate. And after he graduated from high school, he became a police officer with the Lincoln Park Police Department. And no, that has nothing to do with the band, before you ask. This was not because he wanted to be a policeman. He just wanted to drive the fast police cars during car chases.
That's a great angle. You don't hear that often on why someone would want to become a police officer. Is Law and Order. That's a byproduct. I just want to drive the fast cars.
Despite that Preston just wanted to drive the police cars, his mother thought being a police officer was a dangerous occupation, and she asked him to quit the force, which he did. I love that. It's usually like, oh, my son, he's a police officer. And she's like, no, do something else.
Don't want you doing that.
Yes, kind of the exact opposite of what you usually hear. Preston began working on the assembly line at Ford after he quit the police force, but found this plain and simply found the work boring. As you can imagine, that was, the assembly line thing was coming on. That's why they started paying him $5 a day, is because their turnaround was so bad at the standard wage that even if they were paying them this astronomical amount, in the long run, it was cheaper since they weren't constantly rehiring. And so it was the same job. It was just as boring, just as dangerous in some ways, but $5 a day was big money back then. So
yeah, that's what it took. And even back then, I mean, you look at, some of the first indoctrinations of the automotive assembly line and streamlining some of that process, it still burned people out. They got just so tired of doing the same exact thing.
Well, this is what happened to him. So guess what he did? Okay, so dissatisfied with life in a factory, he returned to the police. However, Preston ran into some problems with the force when he took a blowtorch to the interior of his police cruiser. This was because it was freezing outside, and he wanted to let more heat in from the engine in order to warm the interior of the car.
Oh my God. That's thinking outside the box right there, isn't it?
He's cuffing some guys. Hey, can I just hold your hand a little bit longer to warm them here? This did not go over well with his superiors, as you can imagine. And Preston was quickly demoted to a walking beat. Okay, so he's a beat cop. Okay, so he doesn't get to drive fast cars anymore per se. So, but Preston's can-do attitude was also seen during his home life. According to family members in interviews, one time he was installing a radio in the family home, and he realized he needed a hole in order to connect the wire from the antenna outside to the radio inside. He solved this problem by taking his revolver out and shooting a hole through the wall. Now, that is something my dad would do, straight up. Trust me, there's plenty of childhood stories of that type of creative engineering.
That generation sure had some creative mindsets, amongst certain folk. That's for certain.
I don't know how many times it's like, Dad, is this safe? Oh, it'll be fine. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
We'll fix that real quick.
So, Preston quit working for the police again and started a new career as a car salesman. Now, despite this image of sleazy car salesman, Preston was a phenomenal salesman. A lawyer that Preston was affiliated with even posted a $100 bill to a wall in the dealership that Preston worked for. The lawyer proclaimed that anyone who did not take a liking to Preston Tucker within 5 minutes would get the $100 bill. The dollar stayed pinned to the wall and was never known to have left.
Wow. That says a lot, especially back then. You think how far $100 went in that year.
That must be nice just to be, I don't think
that
so.
well
It just
liked.
had a charm to it. I
Yeah.
don't know what it was. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know him, obviously. I don't have a DeLorean. Well, you did, but.
Still, that speaks volumes. Yeah.
So, Preston, being the die-hard gearhead he was, began attending races at the Indianapolis Speedway. He went to these races because he wanted to learn about the innovations that were being exhibited at these races. Traditionally, even though it may seem recreational, major innovations, as you know, end up in cars for the general public. So the technology that it gets in racing ends up a lot of it ends up in the car you drive every day that you buy at the dealership, right? Preston Tucker obviously would take this to heart as his new career progressed. Right? During this time of hanging around at Indianapolis, Preston became friends with Harry Miller, the legendary constructor of American racing cars. Do you know much about Miller?
I don't, actually. I've heard the name, but I don't know his history.
No, I know the name, too. Mind you, this is pretty early on in history here. This is about the 1930s. So they became friends, and they started to work together. In 1934, Preston had managed to contact Edsel Ford, the son of Henry Ford, in order to finance the construction of a series of race cars Preston and Miller were working on. Now, at some point in the future, we will have to do an Edsel Ford episode because he was the exact opposite of his father, is what I gathered. His father was very demanding, very ruthless, typical industrialist. There was not too many people that did not like Edsel. So
Wow.
It's kind of a sad story in some ways.
That will be another episode for sure.
So Edsel agreed. There was only one problem. Preston Miller had to build 10 cars in only 10 months. So yeah, and this is coach-built cars. These aren't being built in an assembly line, so they're
hand assembled.
Yep. Unfortunately, the cars experienced problems, even though they did get them built, but they ultimately did not win any races. So, kind of a bittersweet symphony right there. Despite this early defeat, Preston was not deterred from making his name in the automotive industry. He eventually managed to make a deal with the Dutch government for a combat car because the Dutch were becoming wary of the aggressive policies of Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany at the time. So haven't quite gone to war yet, but everyone's sensing this is something bad's on the horizon here. Tucker began work on the car. It had 3 machine guns, a rotating turret, and could go over 100 miles per hour.
Whoa. I had no idea that aspect of the car's initial development and history there. That's, of course, makes sense considering the era, what you would be thinking about.
You go out to some club, right, and some guy shows up in some hop-down model Honda thinking he's real, hot shit, right? Imagine rolling up in that thing, right?
Yeah, that would set a whole new precedence.
I have a turbo. Well, I have 3 machine guns. So, here's the thing about Preston, and it seems to be kind of something that is throughout his life. I've noticed is that he comes up with good ideas, but it never really quite works out the way he thinks it will. So, even though the combat car performed well, the Dutch government experienced their worst fear when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands in 1940. This meant that Preston was not able to deliver the combat cars to the Dutch military on time. Once again, the setback did not deter him, though. Preston then convinced the American government his combat car would be useful for them in the event they entered the war. In the end, the American military was not interested in a military vehicle that could travel 100 miles per hour. I don't know why.
Right. That one puzzles
Make
me as well.
Make it slower so it's easier to hit. I mean,
yeah, that interesting though, nonetheless.
But they were intrigued by the gun turret that was at the top of the car. So the turret ended up being installed on war machines such as airplanes, PT boats, and landing craft. So the car didn't really end up going, but the turret that he also invented ended up sticking around. In fact, I think turrets like that are still really used today. And he invented that. It's called the Tucker turret.
Wow.
During this time, Preston was also offered a managerial role during the production of the turret during the war. So he was a war contractor. Consequently, he didn't get drafted, and so he was working for them on trying to develop more things during that period. Eventually, the Allies would win the war in 1945, but Preston's dream still involved cars. With the war over, Preston saw an opportunity. The Big Three from Detroit served as defense contractors during the conflict, but with the war over, they returned to building cars once again. Preston was not impressed with these new offerings from Detroit because they weren't new. The Big Three were simply building the cars they already were building before the war had started, which were dated and behind the times. Preston thought he could do better. So it's late 1940s, and they're basically selling you a 1938, 1939 model car. I don't know, it'd be like buying a 2010 Honda Civic,
Today.
Yeah,
that's a good comparison.
Truth be told, Preston had been working on the car of his dreams in his mind for years. He envisioned a car that would have a Porsche-style rear engine, disc brakes, and fuel injection. Now, anyone who is mechanically inclined like yourself knows that is way ahead of its time.
Oh, dramatically ahead of its time. I mean, just the disc brakes alone. I mean, you think about cars that, there's some that still use drum brakes today, and on the rears typically. But to be that, just thinking that kind of foresight, that kind of thought process at that point in time, way ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. Way ahead. Yeah.
No, you're right. I mean, when did disc brakes start becoming standard?
Boy, as far as like a standard, that was not until I want to say it was. You're looking at the 1980s.
Yeah, so we're talking late 1940s. Here,
drum brakes were the standard and go-to for so long, and they started with the front would be front disc, and then rear drums, and even for that to take hold, it took a long time.
I knew when I was getting my 2-year degree, I knew this. I had this classmate, and I was obviously very keen to impress her. And she was explaining to me that when she was hitting the brakes on her car, it didn't feel like her dad's car. And I was like, well, I could, I saw an opportunity here. I could take a look at it for you. And what it was this, it was like mid-aughts black Toyota Corolla, I think. And I was like, what does your dad have? She said, I can't remember what it was. It was a higher end car, though. And so I crawl underneath this thing, and it's got drum brakes on the rear.
Yep.
And I went, that's what I said. I yell from underneath the car. I go, it's got drum brakes. And she goes, what's that? That's 50-year-old technology, at least,
It is. And it's amazing. One that comes to mind right now is Mazda with their economy line, the Mazda 2, for example. All the way up until 2011 to I think 2013, it still has rear drum brakes.
Yeah.
It only has discs on the front. Now, that's a smaller car where it doesn't necessarily warrant. You don't need disc brakes all the way around, but you just think about how old that technology is, and they still use it today. I'm sure it's from a manufacturing cost standpoint.
Sure. So, fuel injection wasn't really about to the 80s either, was it?
Oh, as far as a standard, it's amazing how many cars were innovative with that. One that comes to mind is, 1963 Corvette Stingrays with fuel injection options. Also, Gen 1, I think Corvette also had it at some point there in 1958, I think, experimenting with it. But as far as a standard, we were... it was mid 1980s. The 1980s were interesting from the aspect of they were mating electronics with old technology like carburetors. So like for Honda, for example, it was a horror story from 1980 to 85. You had electronically controlled carburetors before they finally just made it, hey, let's just go fuel injection here and forget this cobbled mess of vacuum hoses and electronics and carbs. It's just crazy.
And there was this other weird oddball one called CIS. Wasn't there? Continuous injection system? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I had a Porsche 924, and it had that. It was like a 1977, somewhere in there. But anyway, I hope that was intuitive for the nerds, but we're both nerds too, so we don't mean that insultingly, trust me. let's see here. Preston had hired George S. Lawson to design a concept car based off the ideas Preston had. The car's design featured two doors and front fenders that pivoted when the headlights so the driver could see around tight corners at night. So kind of think of two rudders up front going left to right. Lawson would spend 2 years working on this concept. This was not a good thing. The concept took so long to develop that it did not gather interest from potential investors. In order to speed things along, Preston ended up hiring Alex Tremulous, who had worked for both Cord and Duesenberg to finalize the design. Preston gave him 6 days to complete his work. 6 days later, on New Year's Eve, Tremulous had done it. Now, from my understanding is he went and worked for, I can't remember if it was Ford or Chrysler, but one of the big three eventually. And it went on to become a pretty well-known designer, was my understanding, right?
Yep. Yes, he did.
But I find it funny, Cord and Duesenberg. I mean, there is so many. You might see those in the car museum, but there is so many dead brands that you forget about. But those were really sophisticated high-end cars for their time.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, they were some of the absolute choice top names out there when you're looking at that level of car.
I mean, it was like Duesenberg. I mean, it's almost like saying Tesla now. I mean, literally, So, to give some kind of context to that.
Yeah, Jay Leno could say a few things about that and has many episodes. That's one of his choice collector cars. There are the Duesenbergs and its history in its entirety.
So, Lawson's design was thought to be too far-fetched, so Tremulous made the car more practical, but managed to keep the car's futuristic ambitions. He gave the car 4 doors, and instead of the fenders pivoting, he instead gave the car a third, what was called a cyclops eye in the middle, which would only move during a 10-degree turn around corners. My understanding was he thought that was safer, and it was less complicated than the kind of the pivoting fender idea. So Tucker wanted his car to be beautiful, fast, and practical, but he also wanted it to be safe. It featured a steering column that was located behind the front axle instead of being in front of it. This meant that the steering wheel would not smash into the driver during an impact like cars that were building in Detroit at the time were. It also would feature a padded dash, pop-out windshields, and something very, very complicated, seatbelts.
Yeah, it's just, all the things you just mentioned, you're going, what year is this again? When you have this kind of thought process going through your design and implementation, it's incredible. And at the same time, seatbelts were not common at all.
No.
The seatbelts people weren't even wearing seatbelts in the front seat of cars. And so the fact that he's thinking about all these other features and things that occur in current production models, again, way ahead of his time.
Yeah, no, I mean, like we're talking about pop-out windshields, we're talking about the rear engine and whatnot, but I just love how seatbelts is nothing really that sophisticated, but just they didn't think about putting them in there generally at the time, Well, with a basic prototype in mind, Preston had already decided to go big. He put a bid on a former wartime property in Chicago, which literally featured a facility that was the largest building in the world at the time. Preston. Let me back up a second. You ever driven along I-5 up there in Seattle and you go past the Boeing factory?
Many times.
Yeah, yep. I'm sure this is much bigger than what this was, but for them, that's what it was like. That's what he bought.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that puts it in perspective, thinking that's mine now, exactly. That massive facility.
And this is a guy that's designing stuff out basically on his farm too, this it's just it came out of nowhere basically, Preston thought the bid was a long shot since Ford and GM had already placed their bid on the property. However, Preston had one lucky advantage. President Franklin Roosevelt had left a legacy of policies that favored small startups compared to established companies, and consequently the War Department decided to give the factory to Preston and not to one of the big three.
Wow, that's an interesting series of events there and things that were put in place in advance. Wow.
Exactly. So he took advantage of that. I don't blame him. So Preston now had a prototype and a factory, a very large one. He just needed one more thing. He needed $15 million to make it happen. This is the only thing he doesn't have. Okay, don't worry, because that's only about $172 million in today's money.
Oh, my gosh.
So the Tucker Corporation offered an IPO, an initial public offering, which helped raise enough money in order to get the company started. Preston and his team worked night and day in order to get a running prototype ready to unveil to the public. But here's the thing, is that they didn't have a lot of time, so they had to kind of use what they had to their advantage. And so the car was even built with parts that were picked from a junkyard.
I didn't know that detail. You got to do what you got to do. I mean, when you're trying to find something to at least jump off.
Hey, what are you boys doing out here? It's like, we are from the one of the newest and largest companies in the world, and we need parts for our prototype.
Seriously, you find yourself in a place like that.
That's like Elon going out there. So you got an electric motor out and a blender out here, so
yeah, completely out of place. Yeah.
So, yeah, they had to do that. As they kept working on the car, many of the innovations that Preston envisioned had to be scrapped. This meant the car did not feature such things as disc brakes, fuel injection, or the double torque converter system that would make a traditional transmission unnecessary. Now, I know what, when I was researching this, all this stuff is, but this is what kind of threw me off. What is a double torque converter? Do you know?
I don't know the technical breakdown of that. I know the breakdown of a standard torque converter and how it converts energy that's usable energy from the engine for the transmission to utilize that and to essentially, shift gears automatically, which is incredible science on its own. That's a whole episode just talking about the inventor of the torque converter. But a double torque converter, I do not know.
Well, basically, what does a torque converter do, though?
A torque converter takes that centrifugal force, that energy transferred from the engine, and it relays it in a usable fashion for the transmission to actually take that and transfer gears. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine because in a manual transmission, you are the one taking that action and instituting it, making that choice. This actually has it, and they vary in design depending on the application, right? I mean, you got a 100 horsepower engine and let's say a 300 horsepower engine, very different there in the power curves and how you make that up. But it transfers it in an allowable way to allow that transmission to utilize it through its series of clutches and valve bodies to automatically shift. And so it's doing it for you versus, again, the manual transmission, much more simplistic set of gears, and you are the one initiating that action.
Yeah, and transmissions are, this is kind of an controversial opinion for me, especially as a car enthusiast, but at least when it comes to daily drivers, I just like having an automatic.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
and I've been that way for years. I've always said that, if I had a Sunday car or anything like that, I'd probably get it in a manual. I'd only really do that if it's classic now, because I was reading in Motor Trend as one of their main writers, and I saw this coming. He says there really is not much point to not having an automatic transmission anymore. They're reliable enough in terms of everyday sense and for performance. For a long time it was just faster with you using that stick to change the gears, but now these computer-controlled gear systems with these paddle shifters are even faster now. So, I don't know if you can even buy a Ferrari with traditionally a clutch and stick,
And again, this is a subject that's easily yet another episode on its own, talking about transmissions and manual versus automatic, especially from a sports car perspective. I think you hit it on the nose, though. Overall, it just doesn't make sense. It has its applications from an enthusiast standpoint, from a sports car standpoint, kind of that Sunday car like you mentioned, but for the everyday application, it just doesn't add up, especially if you live in a metropolitan or city area, and it hasn't for many decades. The wear and tear on a clutch can far surpass the wear and tear on that just automatic without all the hassle, and all the exhaust. I mean, I just think about how often you have to hit a clutch in downtown LA or Portland or Seattle caught in traffic, I mean, you're on that thing. It'll wear you out versus just having it on automatic.
Oh yeah, no, especially if you live in a town called Astoria, Oregon, too.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a good. That's yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone in Astoria that's listening right now is like, yeah, and for all of you who are confused, if you've ever seen about any movie in the 1980s or early 1990s, Astoria was in it somewhere. So it was the town in the Goonies. There you go. Now you know what we're talking.
Short Circuit, if I'm not
Short
mistaken.
Circuit,
Yeah, another one of my favorites.
Kindergarten Cop. What was the other one? Free Willy.
Yeah, that's right. People forget.
Okay, well, let's not talk about whales. Let's get back to the car here. All right. Let's see here. Once I find my place. There we go. Okay. Unfortunately, the car also did not feature the safety features Preston had always wanted in it. Okay, so these included the padded dash and the pop-out windows. So they're having to cut and cut and cut. Okay. Actually, no, I read that wrong. Sorry. No, this is what, yeah, the safety features were kept in the car. Okay. So they did keep the padded dash and the pop-out windows. The reason for the window design was because many people were getting cut from shattered glass during an impact. Preston thought if the windows popped out, then the driver and the passengers would not be harmed by any broken glass. Now, we kind of do it a little differently today. The windows don't pop out, but they have a filament kind of between the two sheets of glass,
correct,
right, that keep it from shattering.
Mm-hmm.
So he was going for a kind of a totally different thing, but he still was thinking ahead, though. Even though some of the engineering aspects had to be sacrificed, the Tucker was ready. Preston scheduled the world premiere of the car on July 17th, 1947. The event was a spectacle worthy of a Hollywood premiere. The festivals included a brass band and rocket-style girls to present various features of the car. Thousands from every direction traveled to attend the event, but unforeseen circumstances were patiently lurking in the dark corners. Now, before I get really into that, I'm not trying to make fun of these people. I know you and me would probably go to a modern-day version of this, but this just tells you how bored people were before TV.
Again, that's a good reminder of the era we're in. Yeah. This is before TV. This was still the radio star.
Yeah.
And that's where your entertainment and not only news, but entertainment and just exposure to the world came from.
Yeah.
It was radio.
It was radio, and radio is great. We're talking basically on radio now,
yep.
But that's all they had was that. And so basically it was like, hey, Steve, you want to go look at this mud pile? I mean, that's really all they had to do other than listen to the radio.
It makes you think how different.
This was going to go see this car was the biggest exciting thing that had happened in a while.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Easily.
So, like I said, but unforeseen circumstances were patiently lurking in dark corners. The team behind stage experienced many problems with the prototype car. Fires supposedly broke out from oil leaks, which the team had to put out in a frenzied fashion. They also discovered the suspension had been tampered with since it appeared that someone had tried to cut through it with a hacksaw. Bum, bum, bum. The cut was so obvious that some suspected foul play. Now, this is all not for certain, but there is some thinking that something bad was going on. And the thought is like, who would not want this car to hit the market?
Exactly. Who would want to sabotage such a creation?
Somebody who's making cars that are a lot less advanced than this one.
That would be the first.
And they probably had help from higher up because they had such economic power on top of it. So not 100% confirmed, but high suspicions there.
Mm-hmm.
Preston was aware of the problems that were occurring backstage, so he bought time by speaking for over 2 hours about the features of the car. Well, I know it had a lot of stuff, don't get me wrong, but it was like, okay, so the door opens like this, and you pull the handle, all right? And you get in, and this thing turns it.
Yeah, you had to definitely try to make it, I guess, as interesting as possible, especially back then.
So even though Preston was doing his best, the crowd started to become restless, as you can imagine. Granted, that is, once again, the sign of the times. People get restless after 2 minutes. He managed to go about 2 hours before they started getting bored with him. So,
No kidding.
yeah. Oh, so finally all the problems had been solved in the back. The band started to play as the burgundy car rolled onto the stage. Preston's daughter ended up christening the car with a bottle of champagne, which doused her unexpected father. The crowd went wild. So, the premiere of the Tucker went phenomenally well. More people than ever were interested in the car, but negative publicity was about to pounce. When word got out about the prototype's problems, the car began to be referred to as the Tin Goose, which I'm sure was, I'm not sure 100%, but that's probably in relation to, because Howard Hughes was knocking about at the exact same time, and you had the Spruce Goose, and so that was probably the inside joke at the topical joke. Better way of putting it.
I would imagine there's probably some link to that. That would make sense, considering the era.
Mm-hmm. So, and this is what I was basically trying to say. So, that really was the case because the name was inspired by another troubled engineering project that was led by Howard Hughes. The plane was officially named the H-1 Hercules, but is better known as the Spruce Goose. Now, for all of you, this is a really odd fact that I have to point out. Where we're literally sitting in our studio, we're about, 10 minutes from the Spruce Goose?
Literally. From your driveway to the runway driveway of the museum, yes, we are literally that close. So. Which is crazy to think about how much history sits right there. That used to sit down in Long Beach for many, many years before
but now it's
made its way up here.
It's in good old McMinnville, Oregon. And since the pandemic is improving in some ways, no, please do come up. We have good wine, good beer as well. Well,
there are many things surrounding the area that you can that are entertainment value and just sightseeing. I tell you, these wineries we have that surround that museum, for example, outside of McMinnville, Evergreen, are worth its pursuit.
And I'd also like to point out, this is not a plug. We were not paid for that.
No.
Anyway, since the car used at the premiere was built so fast, the engineering team did not have time to install a reverse gear. The press at the time reported the car could not go in reverse, which led the public to believe the car was incapable of backing up completely. The production cars, of course, would be fitted with a reverse gear, but damage to the car and the company's reputation was already done. More time constraint problems occurred, and the original engine design had to be abandoned in order to meet the new design requirement of the car. So that was that rear engine thing he was thinking of. Okay, Preston eventually was attracted to an engine made by the Franklin Helicopter Company. He even liked the car so much he bought the entire company and canceled all their existing contracts so they could produce engines for the Tucker Corporation. Even though the new engine was designed well, it was intended to be used in a helicopter, not a car. Since helicopters fly in the air at high speeds, the engine was air-cooled. Didn't need to be liquid-cooled. Right? So even though the Volkswagen Beetle was air-cooled, Tucker had the engine converted to a water cooling system since many customers did not have much confidence in an air-cooled car. So, I don't know why, but that was it probably would have did just fine with the air-cooled engine, but he put it into arguably a more complicated system just to meet consumer satisfaction, essentially.
Which is interesting. Yeah, I guess, just to make them comfortable because it was somewhat unproven, but obviously stout and proven enough in the, in the helicopter industry there. I would think it would have just been just fine on its own with its existing system.
Here we go. All right. We kind of foreshadowed this without realizing it. Another innovation was offering an automatic transmission, which was uncommon for the time. In the end, only 2 completed Tuckers would ever be fitted with this type of transmission. Despite the engineering breakthroughs, the company's financial situation was not as good. Tucker came up with a plan in 1948 where customers could purchase accessories for their new car. This included accoutrements such as radios and Tucker-branded luggage. However, this last-ditch effort for money ultimately was the downfall for the company and the car. The feds claimed this was a scam, and Preston was going to take the money and run with no promise of an actual car. Consequently, the feds ended up charging Tucker with 25 counts of mail fraud. Wow. I love that's when you can't figure out how to nail someone for something, it's mail fraud.
Yeah, there's
like
the
how
fallback.
How many people can you do that to? I mean,
Seriously, even today.
Yeah, exactly.
Decades later.
I think he's wanted for murder. We don't have any evidence. Did he not put a stamp on something? Yeah. Oh, no. Okay.
Federal offense. Federal offense. Mail fraud.
Preston, okay, he had a plan, though. If he could build 50 cars, that would officially make his creation a production car by the legal definitions of the time, which would help prove he always intended to build a profitable car company and was not trying to be a con man. Some of his most loyal employees even volunteered to help build these cars unpaid. In a short amount of time, they did. About 50 brand new Tuckers had been built. The court case would go on for a period of time, but fortunately Preston Tucker was found innocent of fraud allegations. Unfortunately, it was too late to save the company, and the factory was forced to close down. However, this was not the end of Mr. Tucker. I think he's the Terminator.
He just won't die.
He had plans to try to build his car of the future again, but discovered that not only did he lose his original factory, he also lost the rights to his own last name. So he began working on a new car company, and he considered calling it the Talisman instead of the Tucker.
Wow, interesting. I didn't know that.
Another opportunity would also blossom. Preston had also conceived an idea for a new innovative sports car that would be built in partnership with a group of Brazilian investors. Unfortunately for everyone involved, especially for Preston, none of these cars would be completed after Preston Thomas Tucker died on December 26, 1956. Even though it was determined he had died of a heart attack caused by excessive smoking, those close to him said he died of a broken heart. In the long run, though, his dream has not been crushed and continues to this day. There are still 46 of the original 50 Tuckers in existence today, and the innovative features in the Tucker, including seatbelts, fuel injection, and disc brakes, are now compulsory features of nearly all contemporary vehicles. In other words, Preston Tucker's dream may have not been living in one car, but it does live on in every car we drive today. The Tucker was hailed as the car of tomorrow, which is a statement that has proven to be nothing but completely true.
Well put, it certainly does, and it set a precedence that took effect years later and is now a standardization, across the board on what we utilize today in the automotive industry.
Mm-hmm. And with that, we're going to move to our next section because that was the end of our story. Well, the things I wanted to bring up is that I this is my opinion anyway, but I do think he was being sincere. I don't think that was a con artist scheme because I know there's been some elaborate con artist things. I mean, just the fire festival. I mean, it's just one example of that. But when everyone got to that island, there was nothing there. I mean, he had factories, he had cars. I mean, he had substance. I don't think he was trying to rob everyone of their money. I think he actually wanted to do it.
No, I absolutely believe he did too. I think, like some other people that were ahead of their time from, again, different eras. That was the consistency there, is they were just ahead of the competition. And I think some of the stuff, not necessarily the world wasn't ready for, but the competition wasn't ready for. And I believe he was sabotaged to a certain extent. And he truly did want to make things better from a safety standpoint and performance, and bring these features that would help people that are now, like you mentioned, a standard today.
This is my thinking. I think his mistake that he made, if he did make one, was, I wouldn't call him showy, but he was very in the face of the big three, saying, I can make a better car than they can, and I know it, and you know it. And I think that was the mistake. The approach was a little too... He was small. That was the problem. He was too small to take those guys on so aggressively to start with.
I agree. Yep. That was probably his biggest mistake right up front.
And if he just would have just held back a bit, was a little less showy, I think he wouldn't have resulted in that downfall.
Yep. No, at least not as soon. Yeah,
at the very least. So now, you actually have a personal connection to this from what you've told me in the past. Your dad actually had a possible opportunity of buying one, right?
That is correct. And needless to say, with the cars that survived that you mentioned, 46 cars in existence today, value has dramatically gone up over time. Anyways, to get on to my story, my dad used to have his own. He had a small business where he built and manufactured tilt-top trailers for transporting cars or trucks, that kind of thing, and he would tailor them to customer specifications. And part of the business was he would take some of these trailers not only to deliver to customers that had ordered them in other states, but he would also go to car auctions and car shows. And one in particular was in 1980. My mother and him attended a car auction. And I can't remember the auction house that was hosting it, but it was down in Westworld, where Barrett Jackson is at in Arizona. And this is in 1980, mind you. And while they were there, and he was showing one of his trailers off, a Tucker actually came up for auction, and it went up for bid. And I hit my dad up on this story not too long ago to get some of the more fine details. And he remembers it. He doesn't remember the exact dollar amount, but to the best of his memory, the car bid up to $13,000, and it was a little too rich for his blood. He was considering at a lower dollar amount, but again, mind you, this is 1980, recession time kicking in. I mean, it was a rough time, and $13,000 was a lot of money in 1980, and it was just too rich for his blood. So he ended up not bidding on it because it went so high. Well, that same car today, and this varies. I mean, it's between $1 million, $2 million. Some of them 1.5. I mean, it varies quite a bit, but nonetheless, $1 million car today. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Like I don't blame him one tiny bit. It's just one of those hindsight things that just is kind of a bitch. But
hindsight's always 20/20, right? But it's just it's crazy to think. I mean, in 1980, that car was going for that kind of again, a lot of money, but in hindsight, not much money at all compared to what it appreciated to. But, who would have known, right? I mean, it's one of those stories, but it's crazy,
Yeah. Now, a feature we had in the sometimes in the last season is that we would discuss the movies these cars have been in, and you might think, well, I've never heard of this thing. Like, how's it in a movie? Well, it was. And there was actually a pretty big one by some pretty big guys that made it. It came out. Was Tucker the Man in His Dream with I know who he is.
Jeff Bridges.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. And it was actually a Lucasfilm movie. It was a non-Star Wars Lucasfilm movie. It was made in the late 80s. George Lucas was the executive producer on it, and Francis Ford Coppola was the director on it. So of Godfather fame, of course. And my understanding too is I could be wrong on this, but their fathers had bought shares in the company. And so they had a connection to it, which is why they decided to make the movie on it. And I'm not sure about George, but I do know that Coppola owns one of those 46 cars.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, and it's a very good movie. I mean, they took some liberties with it, as most movies do, but you have to keep in mind it's not a documentary. It's a dramatization of the event.
Exactly, yeah.
But I think they got actually pretty true to what had happened.
I think they did, and I remember watching that movie as a young kid in the early 1990s with my dad, and then that's where the story came up naturally of like, oh, yep, well, I remember seeing one of those go up for auction back then. But I thought it was a good take, but like you said, it's not a documentary, it's a drama, so there is that built into it.
Yeah. But, overall, I think the things we have to keep in mind is that, innovation is important, and that should not be forgotten. I mean, that's the only way we move forward. And, sometimes dreams don't work out, but you got to give credit for this guy. He tried as hard as he could, and I guess just for whatever reason, it wasn't in the stars for him. But
no, unfortunately not.
Yeah. But like I said, we're talking about him now, so I think he did well or better than a lot of people who can't say that. So
I believe so.
Yeah.
I think it definitely exceeded what his expectations were, with considering the aftermath of the company, that things would have lived on to this day. Where here we are in 2021, and we're still talking about Tucker.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to start bringing things up for a wrap. This is Joyride. It is a podcast brought to you by Starstruck. If you want to follow other things that me and Adam have also worked on, we, of course, have both worked on the documentary film The Half-Life of Genius that I co-directed, and Adam starred in as the young Dr. Raymer Shriver. We will have this podcast. There will also be other quality products that will be offered on the Starstruck website coming up soon. And there also is, we have another movie project in the works too, but that's kind of on the hush-hush at the moment. So anyway, so I hope everyone enjoyed that. And our next episode, we're going to start expanding. It will not be a car. In fact, it is a vehicle that doesn't have wheels at all.
That's got the wheels turning in my head anyways, thinking about what that might be.
All right, so I hope everyone looks forward to that, and thank you much for listening. We appreciate any following you have. We will be having a Patreon coming up as well, so anything you can donate for our podcast to keep being supported, we would genuinely appreciate that. And you can follow Joyride on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. So until next time, Adam.
Till then.
All right. Thanks much. Starstruck.